A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Lakakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Word Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Requai, and back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, is just going to be a little bit of exhortation. Nothing too heavy, but just going on to the topic of forgiving your parents. And, this is something that when we come into this understanding, we might, I don't know, for whatever reason, we might hold some kinds of, ill will, maybe resentment, for the way things they were, they raised us, things going on in our childhood, and through the best of our ability, we're going through this essentially this path of where we're cleaving onto Yahweh Shai and basically kind of trying to rehabilitate ourselves and essentially cleanse our ways, right? The scriptures talk about being clean through the word, right? And one of the things that kind of sparked my mind was this idea of forgiving your parents, because we live in a time where you don't really want to be holding any grudges towards them. You don't want to be holding what's it called, ill will, feelings of malice, and so on and so forth. And just to cast off those unprofitable works, right? Those things are not going to profit you, right? And these things are essentially, like you saw the dynamic when you go through the story of First Samuel, that dynamic, that relationship between King David and King Saul. You see the dynamic of how King David dealt with him, in the midst of tribulation, right? He had the opportunity to essentially, I guess you can say, recompense evil for evil, but he didn't do that, right? So just going to touch on a couple things here and there, and Lord's will, as always, this lesson will be edifying, right? So I guess I'll start off with, I'll go to the etymology first. And it says here, give, grant, allow, for forgive in the etymology. Give, grant, allow, remit, debt, give up. It says give in marriage, completely, to give up desire or power to punish, right? And like I said, I didn't say this before, but if the shoe fits, wear it, right? Because a lot of us, you may not have your parents around you, or maybe your parents are still alive, and for whatever reason, you guys you don't see eye to eye, right? Things like that. It's good practice to essentially have, I don't want to say a working relationship with them, but it's good to you deal with them accordingly, right? Because we're coming out of a Babylonian culture that didn't cultivate, essentially cultivated us in a perverse sense, right? Where and especially in this society, there's a strong disdain and disrespect, for parents and teachers especially too, right? But the point is that things that may have come up, arisen, and they might have rubbed you the wrong way or whatever. If the opportunity to forgive them, comes up, by all means do so, right? So I want to read this here in Colossians. This is Colossians 3:12, and it says, "Put on, therefore, as the elect of the Most High and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long suffering." And that's part of the I guess the job description, right? Long suffering is something you might have to experience. That was something, speaking for myself, I had to experience this with my father, right? going through ups and downs, but through the grace and power of Yahweh Bashim Shai instructing me to be able to have a working relationship, with my father, right? Despite, here and there, ups and downs from childhood, right? Don't want to get into the details, but the point really is it was moments of suffering, right? But you understand that, and you don't essentially you kind of maintain a certain level of respect for them, even though they don't have the full understanding of who they are and why is the condition that they're in, so on and so forth. But you deal with them accordingly, right? You be peaceable, right? This is verse 13. Forbearing one another, forgiving one another. It says, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as a Mashiach Yahushai forgave you, also do ye. So don't hold on to grudges, man, because it's going to do a little bit of, what's it called? It's not going to be healthy for your spirit, right? It's not going to be healthy for you. It's best, to essentially, walk in the light, basically, right? Having the strength to be able to go through those different situations, and then essentially, you might have to endure it for a time. But if the opportunities, and if I'll say this too, the opportunity comes up to forgive them, by all means do so. And I'm saying this for this reason, right? So I want to jump over to Sirach 28. And it says, he that revengeth, verse 1, it says, he that revengeth shall find vengeance from the Lord, and he will surely keep his sins in remembrance. Forgive thy neighbor the hurt that he hath done unto thee, so shall thy sins also be forgiven when thou prayest, right? So, we got sins to pay for, right? You don't essentially have an opportunity that comes up where your parents, if they're in your vicinity, they see you change and so on and so forth. They realize that you're walking uprightly and you're doing different and you're doing good by them. You're kind of essentially spiritually reaping hot coals of fire on their head, right? They see you doing X, Y, and Z, and that might if the Lord can put they might have a feeling to forgive, ask for your forgiveness, whatever happened between you and them in the past, whatever that was, right? That opportunity does arise. Take the opportunity and do so and forgive them, right? You don't want to be holding on to a grudge, man, because that's why I'm reading this, because we have sins to pay for, right? This is verse 3, and it says, one man beareth hatred against another, and doth seek pardon from the Lord. He showeth no mercy to a man, which is like himself, and doth he ask forgiveness of his own sins. If he that is but flesh nourish hatred, who will entreat for pardon of his sins, right? So it's not good to nourish these things. You want to nourish, fruits of the Spirit, as the Apostle Paul described in Galatians, the 5th chapter, right? Those different fruits of the Spirit, those different fruits, those works, those go and take you a long way, right? Those things are very, very beneficial to, your development, right? When you think about it, also, another reason I wanted to read this was because, for you carrying yourself in that particular way, that might essentially change their perspective on, oh man, this is the truth, right? Because you're walking in an upright fashion, right? They don't have anything to essentially say against you, right? You convince they may, and that's another thing also, they may have mocked you before, hold on. They may have mocked you, they may have ridiculed you, you know what I'm saying? first hearing what you believe in and so on and so forth, right? They may have done all those things, but like, don't hold any hatred towards them, right? Don't hold any hatred. I know this is a bit of a long-winded example, but think about the example of how Joseph felt reuniting with his brothers, and his brothers, him in himself, like reuniting with them. Imagine, they can't imagine the type of feeling, what he felt, when he reunited with them. Yes, it was a long time, but I'm sure there was feelings that he had. As a matter of fact, let's read it. This is kind of more specifically going into like brothers, but like it's the same sentiment can apply also, right? With your parents. This is hold on, let me get it. Excuse me. Okay, let me just get it in. Let me get it in the NLT. Reads it a little bit differently, right? So this is Genesis chapter 50, verse 14. And it says, after burying Jacob, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers. In the NLT it says, and all who had accompanied him to his father's burial. Now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. And it says, Joseph will now show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you. For their sin in entreating you so cruelly, so we, the servants of the Most High, of our Father, beg you to forgive our sin. So this is an opportunity that came up to Joseph, and it says, when Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. So right, he felt something. This is regards to his brothers, but the sentiment of forgiveness, still applies, right? Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph and said, look, we are your slaves, they said. But Joseph replied and said, don't be afraid of me. Am I the Most High that can punish you? You intended to harm me, but the Most High intended all for good. You brought me to this position so I can save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them, right? So the point is, an opportunity came up for Joseph to exemplify being forgiving, I should say, right? This is with his brothers, but the sentiment still applies to your parents. If the opportunity comes up to forgive your parents, whatever, do so, take it, right? Because you don't want to have that, and you don't want to have that sense of guilt, knowing that you had the opportunity to forgive, your parents, and you didn't forgive them, right? You don't want to have that. You want to seize that opportunity. You definitely want to seize that opportunity. You don't want to let that go to waste, right? But our culture, the Babylonian culture they have a very, very backwards way of dealing with, parents, dealing with teachers, at the end of the day, they don't have the full understanding that you may have, right? But Joseph was very essentially spiritual. He understood that, it was all that was for his development, right? The scriptures say a spiritual man judgeth all things, right? So he was being very, very spiritual, but he still had those emotions, right? Whether they called you I know my mother, she called me a Freemason, but I'm not gonna hold that. I'm not gonna carry that to the what's it called, the grave or whatever. I'm not gonna be in that mindset. I'm not gonna forgive you, because I know at the end of the day I need forgiveness, right? So that's really the point here. The point is he had the opportunity to exemplify forgiveness and he took it. That's the main crux that's the main nail in the coffin, right? So, and another reason I wanted to, discuss this also because, when you look at the nature of the way Trump is moving, this might be a far-winded point, the way that, Trump is moving, dusting out a lot of our people, right? We want to have things, we want to have essentially a healthy spiritual bank account, in those times of trouble, right? We don't want to be like, what's it called? Like, when you see a lot of these people, you see a lot of jigs being dusted out, like for example, in the city of Toronto, there was this boy that got struck by a stray bullet. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to be, have that type of judgment. We want the Lord to, when we're in times of trouble, we want the Lord to remember us in those times of trouble. Have that a rich amount of spiritual bank account funds, sufficient funds, where the Lord remembers the good things that you did, and you're able to put cash in on your investment in times of trouble, right? Where was that? Just bear with me. This is Tobit chapter 12, verse 12, and it says, "Now therefore, when thou didst pray Sarah, thy daughter-in-law, I did bring the remembrance of your prayers before the Holy One. And when thou didst bury the dead, I was with thee likewise. And when thou didst not delay to rise up and leave thy dinner, go up and cover the dead, thy good deed was not hid from thee." Thy good deed was not hid from me, but I was with thee, right? So I'm reading this, when you go into the story, Tobit, he was out there, he was burying the dead, and then there was a moment, they rose up, he rose up from, the dinner table, and, he left his dinner, and, he was wondering, okay, is there any, and he covered the dead, he buried the dead of his own people, he suffered tribulation for a bit, but the point is here, that the angel, the Lord, remembered the good deeds that he did, and it's the same sentiment that applies. You want, essentially, when those tribulation, when you see Trump persecuting and doing all these heinous things to a lot of our people, we want to be able to experience the benefits of the Lord protecting us in those times of trouble, man. Because he's coming down with great wrath, right? This guy, he's it's essentially, he's on a short fuse, man. He's really on a short fuse, right? The scriptures say that the end of all things is at hand, right? So the way Trump is behaving and persecuting the northern and the southern kingdom, this is also an opportunity to cash in and make more good spiritual investments, right? Because the scriptures also do say that riches profit not in a day of wrath, but righteousness can deliver from death, right? So the opportunity comes up, take it, because remember, at the end of the day, we still need forgiveness, right? I don't think I finished. Let me see if I finished Sirach 28. Okay, I'll read verse 6. I'll read down to verse 7. And it says, "Remember thy end," Sirach 28, verse 6, and it says, "Remember thy end, and let enmity cease." So it's to let enmity stop. "Remember corruption and death, and abide in the commandments," right? What did Yahushua say? To love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, right? And all thy mind, and love thy brother as thyself, right? these things, forgiveness is one of the things, because we know that we need it. It's also because that helps to keep in mind in these sorts of situations, right? They may have done whatever thing to you, whatever it was, like the shoe fits wearer, right? Because not every brother is going to be in that situation, but if you are in that situation and that situation does come up, by all means take advantage of it, right? Verse 7, and it says, remember the commandments and bear no malice to thy neighbor. Remember the covenant of the highest and wink at ignorance, right? They get up in age. We know that they forget things, whatever it is. It keeps you, to essentially exemplify forbearance, so to speak, right? There was one more I just wanted to grab. Let's see. This is Sirach 7, verse 27, and it says, it says, honor thy father with thy whole heart, and forget not the sorrows of thy mother. Remember that thou was begotten of them, and how canst thou recompense them the things that they have done for thee, right? So, and it's posing a question, right? So, the opportunity comes up, you essentially, they ask you to help, by all means do it, right? It doesn't take anything away from you. As a matter of fact, it adds to your fruits of the spirit, right? So that's pretty much it. But hopefully, I was kind of all over the place with this, but I sincerely pray and hope this lesson was comforting and edifying, right? So keep on praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.